In some cases, the best strategy could be a partnership with a commercial bank, for example, or the best strategy could be an independent license application where the fintech qualifies for that, license, because sometimes the specific way in which the financial technology firm is operating does not qualify for a full license.
Hey, welcome to the FinTech Frontlines by Cora. This podcast is a collection of timeless ideas on how to build, launch, and operate a fintech in Africa from the most experienced minds in African fintech. In this episode, Marietta, Sydney, and Nelson, who are compliance experts, talk about how to deal with regulators if you're building a cross-border product. They also share how to work around the differences in compliance requirements across African countries.
So essentially, what you must understand is with each regulator, the political, social, and economic environment dictates the policies that are pursued, the policy objectives that are pursued. So, for example, with the Central Bank of Nigeria, financial inclusion, whereas, maybe for the Bank of Ghana, it has been, especially in the recent past, stability of the currency. And it also differs from product to product. So, for example, for third world countries, and especially African countries with a heavy reliance on remittances to contribute to the GDP, you might find that there are specific regulations that allow for inbound remittance transactions, but disallow outbound transactions because every government is trying to hold on to those dollar inflows. So essentially, what it requires is a thorough understanding of the financial service, a thorough understanding of the impact of that particular service within that jurisdiction, and an understanding of the policy objectives of the regulator. And once that is understood, you can start to make practical predictions about what is the licensing strategy meant to be for this jurisdiction, and then how do we execute that strategy in a way that makes sense and can guarantee the success of the business. So in some cases, the best strategy could be a partnership with a commercial bank, for example, or the best strategy could be an independent license application where the fintech qualifies for that, license, because sometimes the specific way in which the financial technology firm is operating does not qualify for a full license. And then understanding, even when that license is granted, there may be certain universal limitations that will be implemented by virtue of that financial service and the specific objective that the regulator is trying to achieve. So essentially, it requires a very thorough understanding of the political, social, and economic environment and what the policy objectives of that particular regulator are in that environment. And so you may have, sort of a general overview, a general, idea of the direction in which you want to take your company, but then you have to start to calibrate that process pretty early on to fit into those metrics.
Thank you so much, Marietta. Sydney, please go ahead.
Yes. So I think when it comes to cross-border operations for fintechs, the need to start early, as Marietta highlighted, is there. While you're moving into a big jurisdiction that is different from your parent jurisdiction, it's very important to understand what your business is, who your customers are, and what kind of regulations would typically apply to you. Maybe for smaller fintechs, smaller businesses or startups, like I would say, compliance, the basic principles of compliance would always hold, and then each smaller jurisdiction would make very small variations to those central principles and ideas. The principle of, I understand the KYC process and regime in Kenya, Ghana, most regions basically within Africa, and typically the principles would typically be the same, right? However, there are little things in terms of returns rendition, maybe transactional limits and all. So for smaller fintechs, I would say because costing comes in here. So if you have a compliance team, maybe you would lean more towards finding out research, open source research. Thank God for Google and Google document, or you can easily find precise information of what you need. So, but for bigger fintechs who can afford it, I would typically say when you get into a new African country, there's a need to look for specialists in those countries. So, for example, you want to operate in Ghana, you want to get a specialist compliance officer who is based with them. And who has experience in Ghana. I don't think this kind of role would be one you would want someone who is just starting out. This is somebody who has experience with fintechs, right? So now you get somebody like that, it would help you tailor make your compliance program to suit the country in which you're going into, right? And something I always say is when you're moving outside your comfort zone, let's say you're Nigerian based fintech, Nigeria is typically your comfort zone. When you're moving out, the need to adhere strictly to all laws is very heightened. Right? You really want to adhere to laws, guidelines, and all, because you don't know what the regulatory atmosphere is like in those countries. So, regulators can vary in terms of how severe you want to find companies. So maybe you're in a company where regulators would typically want to understand, maybe be a bit less stringent with fintechs. But when you move across border, you really don't know. So you want to find out what that is. And like I always say, risk management is something that is very critical as you scale and as you grow and you expand. You want to understand what products I have, and what kind of risk appetite do I have. And then if I'm going into this regulatory space, I want to get somebody that will help me tell me what exactly is required of me. Right? And the costing element, like I said, is always there. So you want to know, okay, should I do this? What should I not do? And you typically will understand what the weight of non-compliance is. And then from there, you will make your decisions. You make very informed decisions when you understand the full risk. We can always make assumptions and say, but for very smaller fintechs, well, maybe just strapping at all. But to carry the cost of compliance might not always be easy for them. So in that event, like I said, use what is available on the web. Where that does not apply, and you have the funds to afford it, get local specialists in that jurisdiction. And I think once you do that, it becomes easier. And always try to have the approach of I want to comply when you're in a country that is not your area of strength. So that's my take on it.
Thank you so much, Sydney. Nelson, I'd like to hear your perspective as well, like from like a product standpoint. How do you think fintechs can navigate compliance across different countries, especially in Africa?
All right, so navigating this, basically, I take you from one of the things that Marietta said. Now, there are different compliance skills in different functions. It absolutely makes no sense with you from a product perspective trying to come into a country with a particular product, irrespective of how it has fared within the first place you located or second or third place you located. I think it's the same thing across board. This is going to, one of the things that is actually going to help is going to be the fact that from the very beginning of product conceptualization design, you take into cognizance a compliance representative into that team. She said something at the very beginning to say, as a starter, one of the first things you want to do, even if you don't have the resources to bring a compliance person in, you probably want to bring them in as a consultant in a consulting capacity, where they are part of the design and conceptualization of the product at that stage, particularly when it comes to trying to get into a particular country. Because if you're getting in and you're not bringing a compliance person, which is almost for me one of the most important criteria in getting into a new country as a fintech, you don't bring on board a compliance person, you're probably setting yourself up to fail from the very beginning, because the various pitfalls and everything that is applicable within that country, you probably will not even have an idea. And even bringing in a compliance person still means that there are still going to be some that you probably will not know, but at least it reduces your chances of falling into regulatory pitfalls. You will have done like 70-80% fine. If at all any little thing is going to happen again, it might just be minimal. But at least to a great extent, with the right compliance person, you're sure of actually even starting right. So that for me is one of the ways I think going to get your products into any new country, it becomes very critical.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the FinTech Frontlines. For businesses that are bullish on Africa, Cora provides all the support you need to start and scale with delightful payment products for collections, payouts, and settlements. Learn more at corahq.com.